Jean Rhys. So her name is quite long, Ella Gwendolyn Rhys Williams, the woman who would become known throughout the literary world as Jean Rhys, was born on August 24, 1890 in Russo, Dominica, one of the former English colonies in the Caribbean. So the literature, Caribbean literature, so our writer was born in our country that was a former colony, British colony, that is located in Caribbean. Like the heroine of the most famous work, White Sagasso Sea. What is the spelling or pronunciation? White Sagasso Sea. Sagasso Sea. Just remove R. White Sagasso Sea. So, like the heroine of the most famous work, White Sagasso Sea, Rhys was a Creole heritage. Her father was British, while her mother was a native white West Indians. And in fact, Rhys had a great deal in common with the character of Antoinette Causeway. And her personal experiences likely shaped the events depicted in her fiction. So the way we see the life of our writer Jean Rhys, that life history is quite similar to the life history of the protagonist of this novel, White Sagasso Sea, Antoinette. So Jean Rhys wrote many writings, most of them about her own life. Okay, biographical writing, autobiographical writing. So in this novel, White Sagasso Sea, we see a protagonist. Her name is Antoinette. So Antoinette's life is quite similar to the writer's life herself. That means Jean Rhys. Okay, so what happened in the novel White Sagasso Sea, that is quite similar to the life of our writer Jean Rhys. Perhaps most notably, Rhys' great-grandfather was a slave owner who acquired a Dominican sugar plantation in the 19th century. But after the Emancipation Act was passed, so we know that Dominica was a British colony. At that time, Jean Rhys was born in Dominica, and her great-grandfather, মানে কি দাদার বাবা, ছিলেন একজন slave owner. Slave owner means they would purchase or buy slave and employed that slaves in several plantations, especially the sugar plantation and other paddy fields. Okay, so Jean Rhys' great-grandfather was a slave owner. He had a farm, and he was rich, and he had many slaves had been working in his farm. But in 1838, there was an act passed by President Abraham Lincoln that no slavery will be there. All slaves will be freed, and that act is called Emancipation Act. So when that emancipation was passed, then no slave will be there. So Jean Rhys' great-grandfather, he had a farm, and in that farm many slaves had been working. All the slaves got free. And what happened then? Emancipation Act was passed, his estate fell on hard times. ফার্ম আছে, কিন্তু ফার্মে কাজ করবে কারা? কোনো স্লেভ নেই, কারণ এই ইম্যান্সিপেশন অ্যাক্ট অনুযায়ী সমস্ত স্লেভকে কি করে দিতে হবে? ছেড়ে দিতে হবে। Subsequent riots led to the looting of the house, which eventually burned and arsonists Rhys visited her family's ancestral abode in 1936 and was extremely affected by the experience. And she purportedly had the idea of white Sargasso not long thereafter. Okay? So when Jean Rhys visited her grandfather's house at that time, he got the idea. She was very shocked to see her ancestral house's pitiable condition, because there was no slave, the farm was not working, so there are so many hard time over here. So at that time, after 1936, our writer Jean Rhys wanted to write the great novel that is White Sargasso Sea. Like Antoinette, as a white girl in a chiefly black community, so Jean Rhys's father was English and mother was Dominican, and by them Antoinette, Jean Rhys became the isolated race, that means white British or white father white and মা হচ্ছে ডোমিনিকা, এবং এই কমিউনিটিকে বলা হচ্ছে ক্রেওল কমিউনিটি। And Antoinette was like that. The white girl is chiefly black community, so whenever one white girl in a black community, then white girl will be the minority. Okay? So Antoinette was a minor in West Indies or in Dominica. All the peoples, they were black Africans, the owner, slaves and all others, but Antoinette was white and she was a Creole community. Creole community, that means her father was English and mother was African. So Rhys grew up feeling alienated and alone in the Caribbean. In 1907, at the age of 16, she moved to England for schooling. In previous fiction that we have watched, that means also JnU went to study in a school, Loud School. In the same way, Antoinette went to England and started reading in Jean Rhys at the age of 16 went to England and for schooling, but after the death of her father, she was forced to discontinue her studies, and she drifted into a series of jobs that included chorus girl. That means at that time theatre was very famous, so she started working as a chorus girl in theatre. And mannequin, that means আমরা কাপড়ের দোকানে যে ইয়াগুলো দেখতে পারি, প্লাস্টিকের যে শেপ, সেগুলোকে কি বলা হয়? ম্যানাকিন। ম্যানিকিন। এবং এই জিন রিচ নিজে ম্যানিকিনের দায়িত্ব পালন করেছে, মানে সেই ড্রেসের মডেল হিসেবে কাজ করেছে এবং সেখানে সে কাজ করেছে। সো ম্যানিকিন and artist model, and before working as a volunteer during the First World War, and in 1919 she married a minor Dutch writer by the name of Jean Longley, pronunciation Jean Longley। কত সালে? 1919 সালে। কত সালে জন্ম তার? 1890 সালে। ওকে। আর কত সালে? 1919 সালে ইংল্যান্ডে একজন মাইনর ডাচ পিপলকে বিয়ে করলো, তার নাম কি ছিল? জন লং লে। John Longley. The couple had 2 children, a daughter and a son who died in infancy. During the 1920s, they traveled haphazardly about the continent and occasionally taking up residence in Paris. So John Longley and Jean Rhys, they started traveling here and there, and they settled in Paris, where they lived as bohemian artists and were exposed to the developing genre of modernism. And the feeling of displacement Rhys must have experienced during this time as throughout her life. So self of displacement means someone who will be out of his comfort zone, okay, someone's place, someone's birthplace, whatever may be the condition of the birthplace, that is his root, okay. So Jean Rhys, Jean Rhys, she was born in Dominica, and then he moved to England, and then he married over there, and then he went to Paris. So the displacement from one place to another, and the displacement that creates mental effect to our writer Jean Rhys. That means she was hovering, traveling here and there. What is the problem? You may think that yes, that was very fantastic, that you will be tasting food and weather of several countries. But apart from that, there is another problem, that you can't attach yourself to anyone, especially you become, suppose the person become rootless. Okay, that was the position of our writer Jean Rhys. So she was born in Dominica, then he went to England, then he married a Dutchman, and they settled in Paris. So a displacement was there, and the alienation were there in Jean Rhys's mind. Look here, in order to understand the character of Antoinette, we have to understand the character of Jean Rhys, because Jean Rhys can be the photocopy of Antoinette. So they settled in where? Paris. So displacement were there. Rhys must have experienced during and are manifest in her work. So such kind of displacement, আমরা যেটা বললাম, মানুষ এক জায়গা থেকে আরেক জায়গায় গেলে অনেকে বলা হয় যে yes, you have become the world citizen. আপনি 12টা দেশ ঘুরে বেরিয়েছেন, ঘুরে বেড়া এক জিনিস, এবং স্থায়ীভাবে সেখানে থাকা এবং কোনো কাজের জন্য অনেক বছর ধরে থাকা সেই জিনিসটা। সো সেটার যেমন একটা মজা আছে, কিন্তু তার থেকে বেশি বেদনা আছে, স্পেশালি জিন রিস, বিকজ জিন রিস left her birthplace, went to England, and then settled in Paris. So such kind of displacement affected most of Jean Rhys's writing. So most of the Jean Rhys's writing, we see such kind of mental alienation, mental isolation. That means she was isolated from the large community. So whenever in Dominica, she was isolated and alienated because she was the Creole community, she was the white girl in a black society. And then when he went to England, there she couldn't cope up with the things she had been studying. And then he married a Dutch person, and then she settled in Paris. So such kind of displacement create mental displacement to our writer Jean Rhys. And same thing we see in Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre was born somewhere, and Jane Eyre also studied in a school, then he went somewhere, then he went Rochester's house, then he went another saint's house. So Jane Eyre changed her living place in several portions. That is the displacement were there in case of Jane Eyre. Displacement over there in case of Antoinette. Displacement over there for Jean Rhys. So if we see that Jane Eyre, Antoinette, and our writer Jean Rhys, these 3 girls are quite similar, but one difference is there. What is the difference? So feminism is over there, feminist perspectives are there. What is the perspectives? That means the position of women naturally in the colonial countries. So when Jane Eyre was written, at that time British colonial power was in supreme position. There was no one to ask question against British colonial power. But when White Sagacity was written, at that time at that time British imperial power was in decline. Okay, so we can also see that it is what Sagasu see in post-colonial perspectives. So we see three characters here: Jane Eyre, Antoinette, and Jean Rhys. They are quite similar to each other. So displacement over there in their roots. So manifest in their work, most of which deal with drifting and marginalized women. Why marginalized women? When people will be marginalized in a society, that will create mental pressure and mental isolation and the mental alienation. So this kind of marginalized women we see in Jane Eyre, we see in Antoinette, and also we see in Jean Rhys's own life. Okay. Longley. Tired. আপনারা ওনাদের মতো ঘুমাই যান। Longley was sent. আমরা শেষ করব, আর 5 মিনিটে শেষ করব। Longley was sentenced to prison a few years later. Longley was sentenced to prison a few years later, and in 1924 Rich met and began an affair with the modernist literary critic Maddox Ford. Okay, so Longley, he also died, and Jean Rhys is developing a relationship with another critic who encourages her to write. So this man, Maddox Ford, he encouraged Jean Rhys to write. And their romance eventually ended with much bitterness, but Rich nevertheless continued to support herself as an author. In 1927, she published The Left Bank and the Other Stories. So actually the life history of the author will give many impetus or many information regarding the write-up. So Jean Rhys's life also helped her to write, and after getting married with Maddox Ford, Jean Rhys was inspired, and she wrote the first writing, that was in 1927, The Left Bank and Other Stories. And this was followed by the novel's Postures, American title, After Leaving Mr. Mackenzie, okay, Voice in the Dark, Good Morning, Midnight. So these are the writings. The scholar Francis Wyndham, who was instrumental to Rich's rediscovery in the second half of the 20th century, has stated that all of these novels are rather autobiographical in nature and deal with essentially the same female protagonist in different ages of his life. As I have said, that there is a similarity between Jane Eyre, Jean Rhys, and Antoinette. And also one of the critics, he claimed that Jean Rhys's most of the writing are autobiographical. Autobiographical, that means the autobiography. Suppose one person may write one autobiography, and that autobiography will cover the whole life, isn't it? Many autobiographies. But in case of Jean Rhys, she has written many novels, and most of them are autobiographical, but they are not only one novel. One novel is attributed to one age, another novel is attributed to another age, another novel is attributed to another age. So the autobiographical writing written by Jean Rhys, they were written based on several spheres of Jean Rhys's life. Jean Rhys কতগুলো অটোবায়োগ্রাফি লিখেছেন? অনেকগুলো। অন্য মানুষরা একটা অটোবায়োগ্রাফি লেখে, সারা জীবনের ঘটনা সেখানে লিখে দেয়, কিন্তু জিন রিস করেছেন কি, অধিকাংশ নভেলের মধ্যে তার অটোবায়োগ্রাফিক্যাল নোট আছে, এবং এই অটোবায়োগ্রাফিক্যাল নোটটা জিন রিস বড় হয়েছেন এবং বিভিন্ন স্টেজের যেই তার জীবনের যে ঘটনা প্রবাহ, সেই ঘটনা প্রবাহগুলোই উনি এখানে উঠে নিয়ে এসছেন। এই জন্য জিন রিচেসের অধিকাংশ লেখাই হলো অটোবায়োগ্রাফিক্যাল। সো আই হ্যাভ only ever written about myself. So she also said, and although her novels and short stories met with the moderate success, Jean Rhys disappeared completely from the public eye between the years of 1939 and 1957, and was widely believed to be dead. 1939 থেকে যখন দ্বিতীয় বিশ্বযুদ্ধ শুরু হয় তারপর থেকে 1957 সাল পর্যন্ত তার কোনো ট্রেসই পাওয়া যায় না। কার? জিন রিসের। মনে করা হয়েছিল যে উনি মারা গিয়েছেন। Having divorced Longley in 1933, she went to marry two other men, both of whom passed away and left her a widow. Rich then returned to England, where she shunned literary circle, lived in poverty, and developed a fondness for alcohol and would haunt her rest of her life. In 1949, she was arrested for assaulting neighbors and police, and in 1958, after the BBC aired a dramatization of Good Morning Midnight, she was rediscovered as one of the Britain's great writers. So in 1958, Jean Rhys was rediscovered, and the much revised White Sargasso Sea, which Rhys had been working on for years and was finally published in 1966, and it was awarded the W.H. Smith Literary Award the following year. In recognition of her literary contribution, Rhys was honored as a commander of the British Empire in 1978, and he died on May 14, 1979. Okay, so that is about White Sargasso Sea. So the novel White Sargasso Sea is autobiographical, and that novel is linked to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. So the character Jane Eyre, the protagonist of White Sargasso Sea, Antoinette and Jean Rhys, they are quite similar, but their perspectives, the way their life was, they are three were women, but their perspectives, they are all alienated, but Jane Eyre alienation was different and John Rhys's alienation was different, and that alienation can be compared with the protagonist Antoinette's alienation in the novel White Sargasso Sea. Any question? No question, so your boss is